My talk know that there is this section of near-death experiencers that we really don't know very well, and we don't know how it fits. And Nancy Bush is the person who is addressing that need that we have to cover distressing near-death experiences and try to figure out what it is and how that fits into our cosmology. Nancy Evans Bush was here at the beginning of IANDS. She was the first executive director. She has been past president and on the board more years than she cares to remember. She had a distressing near-death experience at the age of 28, and she's tried to sort this out for, and I quote, longer than dirt. So here's Nancy Evans Bush to lead us and explain her journey. Please give her a hand.
Thanks, Scott. Point number one, this will not be a scary talk. Point number two, those of you who have not heard me before, I have a voice condition called spasmodic dysphonia. I sound a little bit like Diane Rehm. It does not mean that I am about to burst into tears, though your positive response to this would be helpful. Nor does it mean that I am quaking with fright. It's just the way my voice is. It will come and go as it wishes. Point number three, and this really is one of those housekeeping things I should say at the end, but I always forget. And so it isn't until I'm on the way home that I say, ah. So this time I'm doing it first. I want to recommend two books. The first book is Lionel Corbett's Psyche and the Sacred. If you aren't familiar with archetypes, if you wonder where all this talk is coming from, this is a really great place to start. And those of you who just heard him speak know you're in for a treat. The second book, yes, shameless promotion. I mention this because in today's world of publishing, authors self-market. I'm a terrible marketer. And I do think this is an important book, simply because it's the only book that gives, as Bruce Grayson points out in his foreword, a comprehensive look at what about distressing NDEs. So I'm asking you to help spread the word. Nurses, psychotherapists, counselors, grief counselors, hospice workers, EMTs, any of the people who are likely to come in contact. As you know, they need to know about this stuff. I want to talk about hell. Now, I don't really want to talk about hell, but for 30 years, 37 years since Moody's book, we have not talked about hell, with the result that we get to this point and people say, oh, distressing NDEs, good God, I don't believe in hell. Or people refuse to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. You will notice the crowd that is filling this room of people who would just as soon not hear about it. And we have to get past that. We have to say, at some point, what is hell? When we say, I don't believe in hell, what is it we don't believe in? And typically, the hell we don't believe in is a construction of the past 4,000 years that has varied wildly across time. So the first thing I want to do today is do a quick historical review and just see where it came from and where it goes. This will not be any scarier than you let it be. It really, truly is not my intention to creep anybody out. This is Hieronymus Bosch, just because it's a really very cool, heaven, hell, and the sorting out. As far back as human history takes us, we have the view from the ancient Near East of the cosmos. Think of it as a snow globe. Outside the snow globe is heaven. Then what we would call the cover of the snow globe is the firmament, which is a kind of hollow shell, in the middle of which you notice it's called the ocean of heaven. The ocean of heaven, of course, is full of water. As any fool can see, there is water overhead because that's where the rain and snow come from. The firmament is very cleverly tricked out with windows so that the rain can come through, the sun and the moon can pass by. Then there's kind of a crystal goblet with stars. The stars are fixed to the inside of the bowl like a fishbowl. And you will notice Earth is a flat disk supported on, or surrounded on all sides by ocean, which is an empirical truth because, of course, if you walk in any direction far enough, you will come to an ocean. So obviously, we are surrounded. And beneath it is an underworld. Now, the underworld is not hell. It's simply an underworld because that's where the dead spend their time. It is not a place of punishment. It is not a place of reward. You could consider it like your local storage warehouse. The Hebrews called it Sheol. This is my favorite illustration of the underworld because I just love the fact that those cheerful little ghost-like figures are being social in the underworld. The good, the bad, this is how we get songs like phrases like being in Abraham's bosom, because of course Abraham would be there. He's dead. So if you are also dead, you can cozy up with Abraham, Moses, whoever. And this image, oh gosh, this goes back as long as we can see. We're at a particular disadvantage just at our point in history in talking about this stuff, I should point out, because for the first time in a very long time. Religion is an extremely iffy term. We have great numbers of us who are now, who say they are spiritual but not religious. Religion is practically a dirty word in many circles. And yet the fact is that for 4,000, 10,000, as much as 20,000 perhaps years, it has been religion that has provided the stories on which peoples base their cultures. We are in one of those times when the stories is being disassembled. Jean Houston says we're the people between the parentheses. Christendom is moving off. The next story isn't here yet. And here we are in the middle trying to figure out how to describe all of this. So you will hear so many stories this weekend. Just today, think of the descriptions, because there's no single story. So essentially what we're doing here is going through the Judeo-Christian story, because that's where we are. The Sheol view endured until roughly 2,500 years ago, when the Persians invaded Israel. They invaded, well, they were moving over the entire Near East. Israel was just coming out of its Babylonian captivity. Persia would reign for the next 200 years. And it brought with it two particular ideas. The Hebrew view of the cosmos, that snow globe with Sheol, Yahweh, the Hebrew God, did not go to Sheol. He was a God of the living, a God of this world. So for the Hebrews, punishment or judgment affected life in this world. There's a wonderful piece in Deuteronomy, a threat of God's punishment. Your cattle will not thrive, your crops will wither, your streams will dry up, your children will be taken captive. All of this world punishments. What will you suffer? You will not be able to eat your cattle. You will not be able to feed your family with your crops. You will not be able to see your children. So again, all of this, the threat and the punishments, this world. Now come the Persians. The Persians brought with them their religion, Zoroastrianism, which is very dualistic as opposed to that nice compact Hebrew holism. We have total duality, good, evil, right, wrong, yes, no, light, dark. Think Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. The conflict between them, which will be resolved in judgment. There is punishment for evildoers. You see that little thing that looks like the balance beam at the Olympics. The pure of heart cross the bridge with no problem. the wicked tumble and fall into what kind of looks like Cheez-Its maybe, but is actually either flames or a river of molten metal. That idea will seep into Hebrew thought, along with point number 2, which is crucial. Zarathustra was the prophet who originated Zoroastrianism and who single-handedly seems to have invented the concept of apocalypse. Apocalypse is what happens to a people under intolerable stress at a time when they say, oh my God, it's too much, it's too awful, evil is all over, we are doomed, it's desperate, the end of the world has to be coming. God will not permit this, or Hermasta if you're a Zoroastrian. The great God will intervene, a savior will come, the wicked will be destroyed, a new age will come, and those who are pure in heart will live in bliss forever and ever. Does any of this sound familiar? Mm-hmm. And the evil will perish. So this will be the new age. Clearly, we've been talking about that this weekend. Christianity has been talking about that for 2,000 years. This is not a new idea. The Zoroastrians were followed by the Greeks. Now, Sheol and Hades, which is the Greek word for Sheol, it's the underworld, they were virtually identical, except that as time went on, the Greek Hades came to have something like neighborhoods. So if you had been wicked in this life, you lived over here. If you had been kind of bad, but not so much, you were here. If you were on the good side of the gods, you were over here. But you could talk. It was like living along the Canadian border. So you could have relationships. And that's where things lasted for the 200 years of Greek occupation. In with the Greeks, of course, came the Greek love of rational thought, human reason, philosophy. And Hades also came as, again, a geographic place. This is what some people believe to be. It's really a very scary-looking cave. It's in Caesarea Philippi, and it's called the Gates of Hades. So there's this great cave entrance, which was, by the way, originally a temple to Pan. So if you enter the cave, which of course one would do only if one were on the way to the underworld, you would find that inside and way below there is a bottomless lake. So this was the entrance to Hades, geographic. Think of it as a name. I, for some reason, always want to say Cleveland, but I've been told I really shouldn't do that. So there we have the Greeks, who were followed by the Romans. Now, I chose to use this picture simply because of its chaos, its confusion, its focus on military power, and the fact that it illustrates so perfectly the situation in Israel for so many thousands of years. Israel has had the great misfortune to be on everybody's favorite trade route, which means that if you are the leader of an empire that is wanting to get, say, from the Silk Road to China to the markets in Egypt, you whomp through Israel. They have been invaded by more nations than we know the names of. So it's a history of warfare, occupation, rape, pillage, burn the buildings, burn the babies, burn the houses, burn the temples, take it down, put it back up, take it down. It's a terrible, terrible, violence-ridden history. So here come the Romans. Now, the Romans have emphasis on law, order, and military might. Keep that in mind. Into this chaotic time, we've got Israeli unrest, we've got occupying armies, we've got internal warfare among the Jews, we've got absolute havoc, and into this comes Jesus. Jesus was a prophet in the mystical tradition who chose to go up against the power forces and obviously paid a price. His followers for 20, 30 years, we know there were writings, but nobody's found them. So the first writings we have are from the missionary Paul. Paul, who on a business trip had an NDE that was so powerful, it completely took over his life. His vision was of the risen Christ. And just think of the most radiant, blissful description of an NDE you've ever heard of, and that's what he had. And with that, he took the message that we've been hearing and that we all know of radiant NDEs, which is that God is love, but there is also enormous power. There is enormous glory. God will judge in the sense of trying our purity, trying our goodness. But although the truly wicked will be destroyed, Paul makes no mention of anything that we might think of as hell. It's simply not there. Judgment, yes. Torment, Non-believers, no problem. They go disappear. What we see in some of Paul's thinking is virtually the first influence of Greek thinking overtaking Hebrew. With the Jews, there is no question of faith is not a matter of what do you believe. faith is a matter of how do you live? Are you on the way? These doctrinal questions. I read a blog letter or comment this morning in which someone was discussing something like this and said, well, but what kind of Calvinist are you? And are you an anti-Arminian? And I'm thinking, what? What are all these labels? Jewish faith was not dependent on that kind of labeling. It was on how you lived. So that's Paul. Another 20 and more years later, we get the Gospels. The word gospel means good news. The good news was the news that the kingdom of God was approaching, was about to become real. Mark, Matthew, Luke don't go into the theological, philosophical reasoning of Paul. They focus on the life and the teachings, or at least the ministry and life of Jesus. Jesus was a healer. He cast out demons. We say demons, we think of all those illustrations. What was meant at the time by demons was what we would call mental illness. Put on your diagnostic labels, those are the demons. Jesus' teachings were to Israel: love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. That is the message on a postage stamp. Gospel of John, there's no mention of hell. In the Gospels, the first three Gospels, there is mention of Gehenna. I think it's 12 times. We are told that Jesus mentioned Gehenna when he refers to Israel's destruction. He's not talking about individuals, though of course individuals would be caught up in this. But he is talking about suffering and destruction in this world. He's not talking about an afterlife. Essentially, what he's saying is, if Israel does not pay attention to its love of God and care of the poor, the needy, and the loving of each other, the nation will suffer this fiery, horrible destruction, as has happened to them before in the destruction of Jerusalem and the first temple 500 years earlier. Gehenna is that valley you see running from under that tower at the top right. It's a valley where 1,000 years earlier, King Solomon, who was a very ecumenical king, permitted the construction of a temple to the Canaanite god Moloch. Moloch had an appetite for child sacrifice. And in particularly savage, in our view, terms, small children and babies could be offered to Moloch, and the babies would be burned. I'm sorry to say they were alive at the time. To the Jews who were so firmly committed to life and this world and building their nation. This was abomination of the worst kind. It was God who gave life. Babies should not be burned on the altars. And so this entire valley came to be under a ban. The Temple of Moloch was destroyed. Nobody went to this valley. So it became first a sewer, then it became a garbage dump. It became the place where the worst possible kinds of refuse would be thrown and burned and destroyed. The carcasses of animals, the carcasses of criminals. It was a place of horror, and it was called the Valley of Slaughter. So when Jesus mentions Gehenna, this is the valley he's talking about. And Israel knew precisely what that meant. Once more in this section of the Bible, there is a word that has been translated as hell. It's probably the only word in the New Testament that should be translated this way. The word is Tartarus, and it's used as a literary allusion and it's used to a Greek audience, because there is a story that the Titans, who were semi-divine beings, had a plan to destroy humanity. And to punish them, Zeus pitched them into the deepest possible lockout in the underground, the underworld. In the book of 2 Peter, it's mentioned once, and the writer says something about as God through the fallen angels. See the parallel to the semi-divine Titans and the angels into the pit, Tartarus. Now, this appealing photo is from an archaeological dig of the massacre at Jerusalem that in fact occurred in the year 70 of the Common Era. As Jesus had predicted, Israel did not change its ways. People kept warring, they kept on with what they were doing as usual. Eventually the Romans said, enough. And once again, tear down the village, tear down the city, tear down the temple, and in this case, massacre as many thousands of Jews as you can find, and send the rest of them into a diaspora that would last for 2,000 years until the founding of Jerusalem, Israel. So this is the situation in which people were living. And these are the times in which the concept of a punishing afterlife, judgment and torment were growing. The idea of a punitive hell never appears in Sheol. It is never, torment is not mentioned in the books of Moses or the early prophets. It's as human cruelty. human wickedness is what creates the concept of hell. And as we will see, it gets projected onto God. The final book of the New Testament is, of course, Revelation. Here we have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the figures of pestilence, war, famine, death, racing into the world to bring about that final cataclysm. And apocalypse is not simply a time. Apocalypse is a literary genre. It's very similar to sci-fi. It's imaginative. It carries philosophical and sometimes historical echoes. I have sometimes described it as the Busby Berkeley of spiritual literature, if you're a fan of 1920s musicals, full of detail and action and patterns and symbols and things happening. And it brings Revelation and Apocalypse brings us the lake of fire, which is bad enough to consider. But what has happened to this underworld view over time is that now people are burning in that lake of fire. This is not the first hint, but close to the first hint of a genuinely sadistic streak that would follow Christianity right down to the present. Augustine. Augustine was a brilliant theologian with a really twisted psyche, seriously conflicted sexually, seriously tormented spiritually, had a number of his own numinous experiences, but also this strain in his thinking that led him to the conclusion that not only was God a God of wrath who would punish with terrible, terrible punishments, but, said Augustine, these punishments would be eternal. Eternal physical torment with no recourse. Which, because he was Augustine and a brilliant theologian, became part of doctrine. So that for the next 900 years, this doctrine of if you are not baptized, if you do not believe the right thing, I forgot to mention, in the years just before Augustine, Christianity became part of the official religion of the Roman Empire. Remember what I said about the Romans, they're military. They want order. They want consistency. They don't want dissent. So we get this need for a uniform doctrine across the board. This is what we believe. Augustine, perfect. So for the next 900 years, these are the ideas that are percolating through the Christian world. Which brings us to Dante. Dante's description of the 7 levels of hell, described in the Inferno, this attractive sylvan scene here. This is a river of molten excrement. Dante manages what Revelation and Augustine began. Dante brings us the most pornographic, scatological, hideous imagery that one can imagine. And this brings up a very interesting point, because these are the imaginings, Augustine's and these are largely expansions written by people out of their waking consciousness. And I have this terrible feeling these days that our waking consciousness produces far worse imagery than the actual subconscious imaginal realms, say, of dreams and near-death experiences, which kind of bubble up, as Lionel Corbett mentioned earlier. But with Dante, here are the levels. And here we can see there are demons, there are all kinds of hideous tortures. And I mention this particularly because Dante has not left us. He died 1,300 years ago. And he is alive and well and living in our culture, right down the street. A film of Dante's Inferno. A video game of Dante's Inferno. I don't know what this is, but it's clearly Dante's Inferno. Comic books. And I don't know whether this next one is hilarious or tragic. A Lego Inferno. And just to cap this all off, in hundreds of communities around North America, every Halloween, churches put on hellhouses. Hellhouses are like the old haunted houses, but instead of just being spooky with wet spaghetti in your face and your Cub Scout master saying, ooh, behind a door. Hellhouses incorporate very high-tech sound and lights and equipment, and people who do reenactments of situations which will take you straight to hell. And if you do not change your behaviors, this will happen to you. Here we have an enactment of an abortion. You, of course, have noticed the death's head. these things are saturating our culture. Also, we are influenced by the translation of the Bible from the original Greek into Latin and then into English. For example, the word anion, or in our terms, an eon, which means an age or a time, not a quick time, but time, which in our English translations became, in the King James, became eternity. Now just think of the difference of significance if God is going to punish you for an eon or for eternity with no recourse. Theon, brimstone, we read it pretty much exclusively in terms of fire and brimstone, and it indicates the wrath of God. Actually, brimstone was used as a sacred incense in some Hebrew rituals because it indicated the presence of God. Basaniza, to test the purity of precious metals, has been translated as torment. These 4 words, which we have covered 65 times, the word Sheol appears, 11 times Hades, 12 times Gehenna, once Tartarus. And because the King James was translated in the 1600s, by which time the translators all believed in the hell of Augustine and Dante and all, they were all translated as hell. So what this means to us is that the concept of hell, which saturates our culture and which terrifies near-death experiencers and their pastors and their families and friends and all the people who don't want even to look at scary experiences, it's not biblical. There is virtually no scriptural authority for it. So what do we do? How are we going to come to grips with this? Lots of people say, oh, I don't believe in hell. The difficulty is people are still having near-death experiences that make them think they have been to hell. And we have no alternative explanation to give them because we don't look at what the word means or where it came from. We have no alternative as a culture to give them. These guys, and there are, nobody knows how many people who have had terrifying NDEs, who are out there floundering around, trying all on their own to figure it out. What I propose is that we take the message of Lionel Corbett, we take the message of Jung and the depth psychologists, and we take a very strong look at the whole concept of archetype. Whether a person has a radiant experience or a terrifying experience. I think we need to become much better acquainted with the whole concept of archetype and the work of the deep psyche, because many of these images are known to depth psychologists to arise from the depths of our own psyche. Stanislav Grof has said the experience of extraordinary perception can be associated with deep metaphysical fear. Well, you better believe it. Even people with radiant experiences come back saying, because it challenges and undermines the world view. You've heard this, Scott mentioned this earlier. It's been mentioned a dozen times already this weekend. What these experiences do is undermine a person's worldview. And as Grof points out, that we typically associate with sanity. My suggestion is that a distressing NDE, especially a hellish one, needs to be approached not as an afterlife threat or punishment, but as a mandate, I suppose one could say an invitation, to take a new perspective of life and world. We're talking the classic shamanic pattern of suffering, death, and resurrection, which in some experiences, think Howard Storm's experience, is directly experienced as dismemberment, annihilation, and reconstitution. This is a classic shamanic experience. This is not eternal punishment at the hands of an angry God. This is an invitation from the psyche for development, for taking a new perspective. It does not mean one necessarily wishes to take the new perspective, but sometimes the psyche has its own reasons. And as Perry says, in less metaphoric terms, it can be read as an invitation to self-examination. Now, I mean, who wants to go through the disarrangement of core beliefs? This is not on your schedule. You have appointments to keep. But there will be rebuilding. Oops. Okay. So we have arrived at questions. Anything but why. Questions? Yes, sir.
Are you aware of the no-heller primitive Baptist churches in eastern Tennessee? They don't believe in hell because, according to their theology, when Jesus said, "I will see you all in my Father's house," he meant all.
Yes.
Are you familiar with them?
I know there is, I know there are people who think that way. I know there is a whole range of views in Christianity. Essentially, there are two schools of thought. There is a God of love and a whole mess of denominations that operate that way. And there is a whole mess that say God is a God of wrath who bring us these guys. I know there is a group of churches and denominations which absolutely do not believe in hell. Yes.
The reason I was so fascinated is because my grandfather in Virginia was a primitive Baptist preacher
Oh, yes.
who believed that we were consigned at the time of creation whether we were going to hell or heaven, because they believed in double predestination.
Yes.
Another comment, I find that we use the word hell in folk kinds of situations, and my daughter, only a couple of years ago, suggested to me that I had convinced her she was going to hell. I was absolutely horrified. I said, I never preached hellfire damnation. What are you talking about? She said, well, don't you know your favorite saying? I said, I guess not. What was it? She said, you said the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I had a lot of good intentions, and I had some bad ones, so no matter what. And we do kind of throw that around, and somehow it sticks more than we would like for it to.
That's a wonderful point. We do bandy terms around as adults without thinking how they are going to be heard by children. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Is this on? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Nancy, for your important work in this area.
Speak
I need
up.
to be louder, I guess. Can you hear me okay? Closer to the mic. It says the little red light is on. All right? Okay. Thank you for your important work. I think this is a very difficult area to understand. So I've researched several thousand cases, and I just jotted down 3 alternatives to the classic Christian one, and I just wanted to get your reaction. And these are possible explanations. I've heard other people have come back from difficult experiences. It's really hard to find difficult experiences in any quantity.
Can you do me a favor and talk a hair slower and a hair louder?
Okay. So
I'm old.
my question. So is this better?
Oh, please, yes.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
So after reading through several thousand cases myself, I only found in the single digits people that were willing to report on hellish experiences. So I don't really have any idea how many are out there. But I've been trying to search for some of these answers or alternatives, as you stated. One of them came back with the belief that she went to a neutral place. Actually, it wasn't a hellish place. And she says, why am I here? And her guide told her, well, you created this place. So one alternative explanation was that, you know, consciousness paints the universe into the being, and, oh, can I finish it?
No.
Okay.
Or make it a question that she can answer.
Okay, are there any alternatives that you think make sense to you?
I think my most succinct answer would have to be no, because I'm not certain there is any single answer. We know there are at least three types of distressing NDE, not all of them hellish. The hellish experiences are the least frequent. I suspect for some people it may be partially the construct, just as dreams can have effects. You know, I don't know. I'm not a Jungian scholar. I'm an old English teacher who got drawn into this out of a personal experience and couldn't let go of the absence of any information. So I'm 1 foot at a time through this. The most compelling resonance I have found that seems to me to apply most broadly is the Jungian conception of what used to be called the collective unconscious, in which our individual egos are just little sprouts, and that we all connect at base, and that from time to time, as Lionel Corbett said earlier, something from that unconscious erupts, carrying messages. What the messages are, that's the next major question. How do we interpret these things once they are in our waking consciousness? And that, frankly, is a whole section of the book.